So in this video, we're going to be making fudge. And before I jump into that, I did want to mention a study by the Journal of Nutrition. I'll put a link in the description for that. And in this study, they substituted maple syrup for just a small percentage of the other sugar in these people's diets. And this was a randomized, double-blind, controlled, peer-reviewed study, and it showed all kinds of health benefits for just this small substitution, as low as 5% of the sugar in people's diet. Could you imagine the effects really of substituting for 100% of the sugar in someone's diet with healthier sugars such as maple syrup? But how do you go about doing that? Well, one thing you could do is you could actually make fudge the correct way. And so that's what we'll be showing in this video. So this is what you're going to need to make fudge. And so the 5 3/4 quart soup pot, and I would say don't go any smaller than that, because if you get too small of a pot, when it boils over, you don't want it to boil over the pot. And even at this, depending on how hot you put it, you might have to watch it. You need a candy thermometer, and then I have a 14-cup glass food storage container, and the one I have has a locking lid, and so I really like that. The locking lid helps to keep it fresh. I don't think it really needs to be 14-cup. I used to use an 11-cup storage container that seemed to work fine, but I couldn't find one with a locking lid. I found this 14-cup one with the locking lid. So I really like it, and I could even make an extra batch actually and fit it in there. Let's go over the ingredients. We'll first be doing a chocolate batch, and that'll be 32 ounces of maple syrup, 16 ounces of heavy cream, 6 tablespoons butter with salt, and then 8 ounces of unsweetened chocolate. And then the only difference between that batch and the second batch will be the last ingredient. And so instead of the 8 ounces of unsweetened chocolate, that second batch is going to have 24 ounces of peanut butter. So our first step to making fudge, we're going to take our 32 fluid ounces of maple syrup, and we're going to pour it in our saucepan. And we're just going to pour the entire thing in and turn the heat on. Okay, so we can melt the chocolate any way we want to, but today I'm going to use a double boiler to do it. Of course, you could melt it, put a bowl in the microwave and melt the chocolate, or any other way to melt chocolate without burning it. But today I'm just going to use a double boiler that I have here. So I'm gonna fill the bottom up with water so I can boil it, and then I'm gonna put the chocolate in the top. So you might notice that I'm using an electric burner, and that's just my preference. You do not have to use an electric burner. A gas burner will work fine. Okay, so the bottom of the double boiler filled with water. I'm gonna turn the heat on for the double boiler. And we will put the chocolate in the top to melt the chocolate. It's very important that as the heat comes up, we hit the target temperature where you remove the heat very accurately. And so if your stove is too powerful, too strong, and it heats it up too fast, it just makes it harder to hit that temperature perfectly. So I like to actually use an electric stove that heats it nice and evenly, but it really isn't that powerful. And so that helps me not to heat it up too fast. So I have my chocolate, 2 4-ounce bars of chocolate, so that's 8 ounces of chocolate that I'm now melting. So when the maple syrup starts to come to a boil, at this point I'm going to add my heavy whipping cream. So this is 16 fluid ounces of heavy whipping cream, and so I'm just going to add the entire thing in here. If your saucepan starts to overboil, you might need to turn the heat down. That's another reason I like having a stove that isn't extremely strong, because that's another thing that you may have to watch depending on all kinds of different circumstances. It's hard to get into the science of humidity and everything and what causes it to overboil sometimes and not overboil other times. But if it starts to overboil, then yes, you need to turn the temperature down as you're watching it. The next thing that we have to do while we're waiting for it to heat up is to butter our pan. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the butter, put it in the pan, microwave that butter, and just make sure that it coats our pan. And I'll just microwave that little bit of butter a little bit just to melt it. You've probably noticed that I'm not stirring it, and that's the way it's supposed to be done. You should not stir it. You might tend to think that in order to keep the temperature consistent throughout the mixture, you would have to stir it, but you don't. We will stir it at the very end of the process. It is starting to bubble up. If it gets too high, I'll turn down the temperature just to make sure that it doesn't boil over, but I don't think it's going to boil over. The other thing you might notice is that I don't have my thermometer all the way down right now. My thermometer is propped higher, and that's because as it's boiling that high, it could be coating the thermometer with maple syrup, making it hard to read. So my thermometer is propped high right now because I know it's nowhere near where it has to be as far as reaching temp, and it's going to boil down a lot more, obviously, before it's ready to be close to the temp where you remove it from the heat. And so there's no point having the thermometer all the way down because it's just going to get coated with maple syrup and make it hard to read for no reason. Put a little bit of butter and microwaved it in the pan, and so I'm just kind of rolling it around and buttering the pan while I'm waiting. I wanted to interject here that every time you start a new batch of fudge, the soup pot does have to be perfectly clean and rinsed out well. It doesn't have to be dry because any excess water will just be boiled out and it doesn't matter. But it has to be perfectly clean because any excess candy that was left in it from a previous batch will burn. And so I am going to be washing this soup pot between the first and second batch. Okay, so I'm going to measure out 6 tablespoons of butter and have that ready to go in. So when this finally does reach the target temperature, we're going to remove it from the heat source immediately, and then I'm also going to add the butter. And I like to add the butter right after removing the heat source because the cold butter will help to cool it down and make sure that it doesn't cook anymore, it doesn't get any hotter, it stops right at that target temperature. So 6 tablespoons butter, measuring out. Another option for variety would be to make maple fudge, and the process would be exactly the same as what I'm showing. The only difference would be that you wouldn't add chocolate or peanut butter. The only 3 ingredients would be maple syrup, heavy cream, and butter. Okay, so as you see, it did not boil over. I could probably start thinking about putting the thermometer down now. That's what it does. The level rises and then it goes back down as it boils down and it stops bubbling as much. And so I can put the thermometer down and see what temperature it's at now. So after I finish this batch, I'm going to do a second batch of peanut butter. I'm going to skip this entire section here of what I'm doing now because the process is exactly the same. So you have your base process and your base ingredients. Of course, your base ingredients is your maple syrup, your heavy whipping cream, and your butter. And then the process with those is always exactly the same. You boil the heavy whipped cream with the maple syrup, bring it up to temperature, remove it from the heat source at the exact correct temperature, and then once you've removed it, then you add the butter that you've measured out. That part is always the same no matter what type of fudge you're making, but then it depends. If you have peanut butter fudge, obviously you're adding peanut butter. If it's chocolate fudge, you're adding the chocolate. Okay, so another thing that I'm going to do while I'm waiting for the temperature to come up, is I'm going to get ready for the next batch and prepare the peanut butter. So here's my peanut butter. It's the 24 ounces of peanut butter. And of course I'm going to put the whole thing in when we're ready with that batch. But I'm going to open that up and I'm going to stir the peanut butter to get it ready. Now the other thing that we're looking at this point is what the temperature actually is. So I may have to zoom in if you can't see the thermometer in a little bit. I'm going to stir the peanut butter up first because we still have time. When the temperature gets closer, we'll start paying more attention to what the temperature is. So I'm stirring the peanut butter here. Now with peanut butter, you have to be careful because a lot of times inappropriate ingredients are added to peanut butter, such as sugar and who knows what else. So you need to make sure that your peanut butter only has peanuts and salt. The peanut butter is stirred pretty well, so that's good. And now the temperature is starting to get close to thread. So let me show you what that means. So the temperature is starting to get close. So if I move the angle so you could see the temperature now, it's about 108 degrees Celsius. I'm talking in terms of Celsius because the line on the Fahrenheit, the lines are just so close together, and I think it's easier to see what's going on if we talk in terms of Celsius. So when it gets to that thread line, that's 110 degrees. And so one line above that on the Celsius side is 112 degrees. That's our target temperature. When it gets to 112 degrees Celsius, we're gonna pull it off and remove it from the heat. So we see where we are now. We're getting close to thread, and we know we have to pull it off when it gets to 1 line Celsius above thread. That would be 112 degrees Celsius. Also wanted to mention that I don't think all candy thermometers are calibrated exactly the same. So you may need to play around with this a little to see where your thermometer hits it best. I also know that there's differences depending on the humidity, that the best temperature will vary slightly based on humidity. But I think the biggest difference is in the calibration of the candy thermometer. I think these little candy thermometers, they can vary somewhat as far as where the calibration actually sits. So you may have to play around with the temperature to get it to actually hit perfectly at the right temperature for your thermometer based on how it's calibrated. Also, if you found this video helpful or informative, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, and that'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, so we removed it from the heat and we've added the butter. And so now it's time to pour the chocolate in, the melted chocolate. And so we do this while we're waiting for it to cool down. Now you don't stir, you still just wait for it to cool down at this point. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. Okay, so we just wait for 10 minutes now. And then after 10 minutes, then we're going to start stirring. I could also, at this time, we don't need the candy thermometer at this point, so I can remove this from the pot so it's ready to stir. your fudge. It's cooling down. You've got the chocolate in there. You've got the butter in there. And you've got your maple candy mix. And so it's going to cool for approximately 10 minutes. So it's about time to stir. So we're going to take just a regular spoon and start stirring the mixture. So we're going to stir it for about 10 minutes, but you can't go by time, you have to go by feel. So it's very important. This is the two crucial parts about making fudge. One is getting the right temperature, and the other is stirring it. And you have to stop stirring at just the right point. So it's important that you have the feel. Okay, so that was our timer, letting us know that it's about time to start stirring. And so I'm going to set another timer to let me know about how long I've been stirring. But I'm not going to go by that. I'm going to go by feel. The timer will just kind of help tell me where I am. So it's very important though to stir by hand, because I used to do this with a mixer, an electric hand mixer, and you just don't have the feel. You can't really feel the consistency of the fudge. So it's important to be able to feel it. And one trick, you kind of tip the pan and just see how it flows, see how flowy the fudge is, because as you're stirring it, the temperature is also still cooling down. And so that's the point. You're putting air into it as it's cooling down. And so the consistency's changing as it's cooling down, and you're stirring it, and so you can feel that consistency as you're stirring it. And one trick is to lift up the spoon and let it drop, and it should fold. You should see the fudge start to fold, and that's an indication that it's ready to pour, because you want to pour it at just the point where it's still, how do I describe this? It's still able to pour, right? So it's still pourable, but yet it's right at that point where it's almost not pourable. Actually, if you go to the point where it won't pour anymore, you know you've went too far. It's going to be crumbly, and that's not good. It'll still taste sweet and everything, but you want to try to get it at that point where it's still pourable. It should be folding nicely as it comes out of the pan and you're pouring it into your other pan. So I've got the pan that I'm pouring it into right here to the right, so it's close by. So right when it gets to that point where I'm ready to pour, I'm just going to pour it into this pan. And I'm actually, when I make my second batch, then I'm going to pour the second batch right on top of the first. And this pan is big enough actually that I could almost fit 3 whole batches of this in it if I wanted to. And I also like about this pan that I'm pouring into that it's airtight. It has that locking lid, and so that helps to keep it nice and fresh. So one thing that's important to mention too is stirring like this for a long time can get really difficult. So you may have to switch hands. I know I have to switch hands. Mainly it gets hard on my fingers. It gets a little hard on my fingers. But either way, if you start getting too tired with stirring, just switch hands. So you have to switch one hand and then the other hand, so it doesn't get too tiresome on your hand. So it's ready. Let me show you. As I'm tipping the pan, that's how the consistency is. Okay, so see how it folds as it goes down. So it actually only took 5 minutes to stir, and so it's important to go by feel, because there's a lot of different factors that can determine when it reaches that consistency where you have to stop stirring and pour it. So it's important to go by feel, and that's why it's so important to use a spoon. Don't try to use a hand mixer. And yeah, just switch your hands, right hand and left hand, so you don't get too tired of mixing. But it's important to just use a spoon. So I wanted to mention a third option as far as I'm showing the chocolate and the peanut butter recipes. But instead of adding chocolate or peanut butter when you're done bringing it up to temp, you could just add salt and then pour it on top of popcorn. And you really just have to mix it together, but you don't have to worry about stirring it in order to put air into it if you're doing it that way. That's not important. And also, you don't have to worry about bringing it up to that high temperature. You could bring it up to a lower temperature, somewhere around thread temperature, and it'll be fine if you're just pouring it on top of popcorn. And the only disadvantage, I would say, is it doesn't quite last as long as far as the shelf life. You would want to make sure that you eat it in a few days, no more than a week, because the popcorn will start getting stale. And I did want to say, with the other fudge recipes where you don't have popcorn, they do last really, really, really well compared to a lot of baked goods. Like if you're baking a cake, that's not going to last that long. Fudge really lasts really well. It doesn't need refrigerated. In fact, it stays better if you don't refrigerate it, but it still is good to make it last longer by putting it in a locking lid, an airtight container, and that helps it to last longer. And it really, really does last a long time, and it still tastes good, especially if you make it this way. It starts looking just like that. That's how it starts looking, the fudge itself, when it's time to cool off. And yep, there it is. It's at temp. Pull it off and add the butter. So now that we've added butter, we can pour the peanut butter in, because it's the peanut butter batch. We're just going to pour the whole thing in. So this is a 24-ounce peanut butter container. We're going to pour the whole thing in. Just try to get it all out as best you can. We don't need the candy thermometer anymore, so I'm going to take that out. So it'll be ready to stir then once our 10 minutes is up of cool time. Okay, so it's time for us to stir. So again, we go by feel. I'll start a timer just to see where I am, how long it's been, but it's going to go by feel. A lot of times the peanut butter doesn't take as long as the chocolate, but we'll see. I did use a gas burner one time in the winter time when we lost our electricity, and it actually worked out really well. And the boiling of the fudge actually created a little heat in the house, because with our electricity out, we didn't have any heat. So the boiling of the fudge created a little bit of heat to help make the cold winter day with no heat a little bit more bearable. See, it's folding. You can tell it's folding nice and good there. So it's definitely ready.